Hello ETL enthusiasts, welcome to this presentation. In this presentation I will be explaining session properties in lieu of the Informatica interview perspective. My name is Rira. Let us start the music. Here is the snapshot of this session properties. I'm going to explain each and every property and each and every options we have, each and every tab we have, and discuss with the options we have for the session. Okay, this is the second step after creating the mapping that we will be setting up the session for load process. Okay, let us start with the general options properties tab. Let us see the first property, write backward compatible session log file. Integration service creates a log file, each and every step that has been executed while executing the session run. Okay, the integration service writes the information about the workflow or session to a text file and the log events to a binary file so that you can view log in any text editor. If you don't check this option, then the log file that have been created with Informatica integration service, you not able to read from a outside text editor. You can still read from the monitor session log. Okay, that's why this option is very important. So that if you want to revisit the history session log and understand the issues, then you need this to be checked out. Next one is session log file name. This session log file name by default the session name .log, but if you rename the session, then the session log name you have to manually rename it to sync the session name. That is the best practice. Let us see in the next property. Parameter file name. Parameter file is a key value pair that can be used to make the session and mapping flexible to use all these parameters and variables. Okay, so parameter file that is being used for this session, if it is separate than workflow parameter. In general, for a workflow, any number of sessions in there, we have a one parameter file. If in their situation you want a separate parameter file a particular session, then you still have a separate section in the session file for the workflow parameter file. But if you still want a separate parameter file name, then you can use it, this property, but usually we don't. Okay, enable test load. You think session is completely set up, but you want to test the whether it runs okay or not, then this enable test load will help you to test the correctness of the mapping session and parameter file. Number of rows to test. So when you select the enable test load, then you have to select how many numbers you want to test. Usually one, because this is not the debug you're doing. So only one, just make sure session runs fine or not. Okay. Next property we have is source connection value and target connection value. If source is database and target is database, then the DB connection will be given here. Instead of hard code value, we usually give parameter value which is defined in the parameter file name. Okay, why? Because say for example you have same code, but it has to run for development as well as QA as well as sit as well as UAT, and then it will go to production is different environment, but all these dev QA sit UAT everything is in development environment only, and you want to use the same code for all these environments, then you need this parameter file to be set up properly. Okay, so the connections usually in this way: dollar source aura oracle sys connection and target aura sys connection. Okay, this big name, instead of using this big name, this will be declared in parameter file. and this big name will be used in dollar source and dollar target in one particular place of the session, and these can be reset in lookup sources and target as a connection value as source and target instead of the big connection name. So this is also very another variable which is makes the work very less for us. Let us see the next property. Treat source rows as. Okay, it is how a source record are flagged for target in mapping. So it may be insert or update or delete or data driven. Okay, if your mapping has a update strategy, then whether to delete or update or insert, and if you have multiple operations in mapping itself like dimension 2, say cd dimension 2, then the default property will be set to data driven. Whereas in general, if you have a simple pass mapping from source to target, it is only loading between there is a expression or something, a filter is there, then insert is the option. Insert is the default option that will be selected. Okay, this is important. If you see, I'm giving this in orange color, that is important. If it is in green color, we are not bothering about it. Okay, so this is important in respect of the interview also. Okay, let us see the next property. Commit type. Target is the value for this commit type. So anyway, we are committing to values always in target only, it's not source, so there's no value to change here. It is immutable, it's not changeable. Okay, then commit interval, this can be changeable. By default 10,000 records, that means every time integration service takes 10,000 records as a transaction group or block of transaction, and then do all the transaction, apply the business logic in between whatever you mentioned like filter, joiner and all the stuff that will be done. After that it will commit into the target after 10 records have been processed, 10k records have been processed. That is the default value. You can increase or decrease depending on your requirement. Commit on end file. The above commit interval and commit type, commit interval is based on database targets, whereas file target, then commit on end file is a file target property to set up. Here comes the next property. I think we got it twice. Green usually we don't change. Orange is important thing we may change. Okay. So please observe that here. Rollback transactions on errors. Okay. In case of any errors, all transactions will be rolled back before committing to the target. Okay. So this option helps to roll back everything. Otherwise, it will be unnecessarily loading few data, and then all other records will be rejected. So irrespective of that, we just wanted to roll back all transactions so that it will be clean load. Okay. Java class path is required when you have your mapping with Java transformation is set up in that. Java class path location must be declared. Otherwise, we don't use this one. Let us say next one, recovery strategy. When there is a failure in between the load of this session, if you would like to recover the failed session instead of restarting the session from the beginning after rollback, this property can be set. Default is failed task and continue workflow. That means integration service simply fail the task, revert all the changes, revert all the data committed, and then continue workflow. Okay, restart task is another option. When integration service recovers workflow on a failure, it restarts each recoverable task that is configured to restart strategy. Fail task and continue workflow, it doesn't recover the task. Resume from the last checkpoint is one more option. Integration service recovers a stopped, aborted, or terminated session from last checkpoint. Say for example you have 1 million records. Okay, 25,000 or 50,000 already loaded. and it is a reject. I mean, it's failed at 50,001 record. You don't want to start from the beginning, the load, because SCD type 2 will be taking longer time. So instead, you want to recover the failed session. So recover settings need to be done separately to achieve this target. Okay, that's how recovery strategy will work. That's the end of the general options of the properties. Then we are going to the performance options here. Okay. First property here is DTM buffer size. Okay. Amount of memory allocated to the session from the DTM process by integration service. Okay. By default, Workflow Manager allocates minimum of 12 MB for DTM buffer memory. The property is set to auto because integration service automatically determines DTM buffer memory depending on the load and depending on the CPU and memory, other properties of the configuration. Or you can give any number. It must be numeric value and with appending MB, GB and etc. So you can give me 512 MB, 1 GB, like that values you can be given. Okay, DTM buffer size improves the performance, but it depends on how much memory you already have in the Informatica integration service already, right? If it is installed on a less memory and you allocated more of the memory here, then it will be a problem for Informatica processing. Let us see the next property here. Collect performance data. Collect all the details from the session performance You can view performance details in monitor. This can collect what are the lookup row numbers, count, input, output, and how many cache, how much cache, and all these things collect. It collects the performance data for your review, so that you can improve the performance. Write performance data to a repository. So you have an option. Performance details for the session gathered will be stored in repository. You can view the history of session runs. If you want to view the previous runs, you can use this option. Please observe they are in green. That means we don't mostly use it. Let us see the next one. Incremental aggregation. When a mapping has aggregated transformation and you have a requirement to have incremental aggregation, then this will help. Incremental aggregation improves the performance of the aggregator. So this is important. Reinitialize aggregate cache. Overrides listing aggregate file for an incremental aggregation session. So it reinitializes the cache which has already been created, which we never change. Enable high precision. This is very important. Process the decimal data type to a bigger numbers decimal. Okay, if you observe here, source have a value 134.948464 some decimal values. Okay, but if you don't select this enable high precision and load the session with a target value of like this 134.5 x exponential value of 4, hence you need this property to set up always. That's the best practice. Okay, if you set this enable high value, then the source value 134.948464 whatever it is will come as is. Otherwise you will get exponential value like 134.5. So this is very important to set up. As a best practice, by default you do it. Session retry on deadlock. Integration service retry target writes on deadlock for a normal load. You can configure the integration service to set number of deadlock retries and a deadlock sleep time period. Usually it will be all automatically set, or administrator will set at the console level. So we don't need to bother about. That's why it is green. Session sort order. Sort order for the session. We never use this one. Only orange ones we use. In my total 15 years of experience, these green things are never used. Let us, let us see the next one. Pushdown optimization. This is very important. The integration service analyzes the transformation from source to target or target to source depending on the type. and pushes the logic either source or target or both sides so that it can improve the performance. Okay, default is none. Okay, in my 15 years experience I never use this one. I don't have any option of to use this one, um, because my client never wanted me to go to database logs to check the errors if anything happens. If we are using Informatica logs can be checked. But when you use this push down optimization, all logs are database issues. If you push the logic to database, either source or target, then you have to go to database to check the logs. Always, it's a headache thing. That's why push down optimization can't be used. Instead, we can use partitioning, Informatica level partitioning, which will be helpful. And if it is a simple mapping, mostly then only use push down optimization. If it is a SCD2, nobody will use push down optimization. So then what is the use of, right? If it is simple mapping, then process must be faster. If it is not faster, that means your system CPU may be 2 GB. Please increase to 20 GB. Thank you. And let us see next option. Allow temporary view for pushdown. Allow temporary sequence for pushdown. When your mapping has pushdown optimization to be used, if you set it in the session property, the pushdown optimization, then you need these two to be set up when you have a sequence generator in your mapping. And if you want to view the pushdown data while pushdown is happening, if you want to view some data, then you can use this one. These properties can be set it up. Okay, mostly we don't use. I mean, in my 15 years experience I never used it, but I don't know whether you can use it, because most of the interviews have this question, pushdown optimization, whereas I'm really not sure uh, in what all scenarios we can use it, or if anybody can use it, please put it in comment. I love to see that. Let us see the next property. So there is advanced a tab in the first tab in the configuration object properties. Okay, let us see this one. The first one we're talking about here is constraint based load ordering, CBLO. You might have got that already. When foreign key relationship between target tables have one mapping load, this property makes sure the parent table load first and the dependent table later. Okay, say for example you have a foreign key relationship between employee and department. Okay, department has to be loaded first. Otherwise, if an employee is coming with a 10 department number, which 10 department is not available in 10 department number by the time already, then it's a rejection, right? So instead of that, Informatica integration service will take care of that for you when you place constraint based load ordering setup. So this has to be set up. That's why it is an orange color. It's very important. Cache lookup function. This I never used, but if selected, the integration service caches lookup functions in the mapping, overriding mapping level lookup configurations. If not selected, the integration service perform lookups on a row by row basis unless otherwise specified in the mapping. I never used it. Let, let us see what comes next. Default buffer block size. Size of the buffer blocks used to move data from sources to target depending on the logic. Default is auto. Okay, line sequential buffer length, number of bytes that the integration service reads for each line of the file. Okay, maximum partial session log files, maximum number of partial log files to save. Okay, these are the properties we never touch and we'll keep as is by default. Let us see the next one. Maximum percentage of total memory allowed for auto memory attributes. This is first time I'm looking at. Additional concurrent pipelines for lookup cache creation, custom properties, pre-built lookup cache, pre-85 timestamp compatibility. This I have been looking at this first time. Okay, custom properties are important, whereas others we never change in our lifetime. Okay, custom properties are needed only when if you have a target as a flat file, then header will have a hash by default. So if you want to remove that hash, you need the custom property to set up to remove that hash for user keys has to be true so that it will be remove the remove the hash from the target file. So custom properties needed only for that particular option. For others, we don't need it. Okay. For others, we can keep it default, and I never see them basically. Date time format string. We will never change this one, but these are the options we can decide which one you want to see. Datetime format defined in the session configuration object. Default is YYYY and HH full time format. You can also specify seconds, milliseconds, and nanoseconds if you wanted or you want any requirement. Okay, this is usually used in the session log for the details of the times that have been captured. So we don't generally touch this one, but this is good to know that we have multiple options here. Let us see config object tab have log options also after advanced options. Let us see the log options. These are important too. Save session logs by. So how do you want to save the sessions if you have multiple sessions? By timestamp, so that the log manager saves all session logs with the timestamp appending. Say for example, customer dimension dot date dot log runs. The manager added a unique number for log name 1 dot log name 2 dot log, like that. So save session log by default we will use timestamp. Okay, so that it can't be override. If you have multiple session logs, if you save like save session log for these runs, that means number of history logs you want to keep for a particular session. In development, we generally keep only 5 logs, and in any way session logs will be saved by timestamp, so that will not be overwritten if you reload multiple times of the session. But 5 is the maximum thing we will do it in development. In production it may be 10. Okay. Session log file maximum size. So maximum number of MB size you want a session log file to be created. We generally don't give this option because we usually use log file normal property instead of verbose data, verbose init. Verbose init, verbose data or the tracing levels, if you give that for debugging purpose, it will create lot of big log files. Then you need the session log maximum number to set up maximum size, otherwise we don't need to. So in general we don't use this, only normal process will keep it as is. Okay, so session log file name, max time period you want to give, maximum number of hours that the integration service writes to a session log file if it is a long running session. We don't generally change this. Maximum partial session log files. So I think the old one has been copied here, orange one. So this is to set maximum partial session log files. We don't generally change. Writer commit statistics log frequency. So frequency that the integration service writes commit statistics in the session log. Write commit statistics log interval, time interval in minutes to write commit statistics to the log file and hours. Here are see these properties ever in my 16 years experience. Let us see the next options we have. Error handling in config object. Let us see each and every one. Stop on errors, which is very important. Stop on errors option by default set to 0. Okay, that means in case of non-fatal errors, it will never fail. It will simply keep the rejected rows in the logs. If you mention 1, then that is like a threshold. So if one error has been set up in the stop on errors, then if one non-fatal error occurred, it will stop the session and writes the data into the log. So write the information into the log. That's a better option instead of you wait for multiple rejections, because rejection may take a long time to process the sessions. So it will be and your throughput will also be getting reduced because of the rejections, because it has to write a lot of things in the logs. So it is better to have this one always set up as a best practice. Okay, so that it will stop. Please remember this one. This is non-fatal error. If it is a fatal error, then session will stop itself. You don't need to set this one threshold because, say for example, database connection issues, integration service is down, our CPU memory has a exhaust problem. I mean, we don't have the memory. Then these are the fatal errors that nobody can do anything. Override tracing. So mapping has tracing levels. We usually keep normal. If you want the mappings tracing levels have to be overridden in the session log itself, then you can do that in here session log. We don't do that. On stored procedure error, if there is a stored procedure pre or post session stored procedures have been used and you want to stop while stored procedure error even it's one, because it happens in database. So we don't want to go to the database logs and see, right? So we just want to stop it so that we can check it properly. On pre-session command task error, if a pre-session command has a task error, or pre-post SQL error, if you have pre-session or post-session SQL errors, that stops by default. Other options are continuous irrespective of errors. Even you have errors, say for example, you have an update query or a delete query or insert query in the pre-post SQL as an audit table insert or something. Then if you think it's okay, even if there is an error you want to continue, it's not a fatal for you, then you can continue. By default, we don't touch anything. It will stop by default. Let us see error log type now. How do you want to write error log details into? So you want to put it in file by default, or you want to load it in a separate table so that you can handle error handling separately, or you don't want anything, none, because I will tell you. Okay, when you select error log type tables, you need the log DB connection because you wanted to write into table, and it may be a different database, or you want to capture in a separate error handling database separately, or you want source or target to be used. So that's why database connection is needed. 4 tables will be created by the integration service by default and keep the data into there. Error log table name prefix. So if you want to have the log tables automatically created by the integration service, then you want to keep your project name as a prefix. Error log file directory, error log file name. So you want error logs to be in a particular directory, log file name with error log file name details so that it will be troubleshooted later. Okay. So if error log type is stable, then we need the DB connection to be set up. Okay. If it is file, we don't need to. If it is none, by default it's none, so we don't do anything. In any project, clients never show interest in Informatica integration service created tables because it may have some codes 0, 1, 2, 3 indicators, but we may not be understanding those. But every project, every client has a separate requirement for error handling process. So that's why they don't agree this one. At least my 15 years experience, 8 projects I work at, the big projects, US Bank and other McDonald's projects, those never use this one, so that means nobody will use it. Okay, because we have to reprocess these errors. That can't be done with this approach, and we have to give the access to the source team so that they can do updates. So it's not a feasible option, so we don't use that. Let us see the next one. Log row data specifies whether or not a log transformation row data can be in their logs. Log source row data specifies whether or not to log source row data. Data column delimiter. Delimiter for string type source row data and transformation group row data. This is the first time I'm seeing this. There's nothing to explain. We never use it. By default, we'll keep it as is. Let us see config object has a partitioning options here. Okay, dynamic partitioning, the first one. Dynamic partitioning. Configure dynamic partitioning using one of the following methods. One, by default, don't use dynamic partitioning. We just do that. Based on number of partitioning you want to do, or based on number of nodes you want to do, based on source partitioning you want to do, based on number of CPUs you want to do this dynamic partitioning. We never do dynamic partitioning because Informatica integration service will do this. No, instead of that, we create source and target separate partitions, either key range partition, round robin, or whatever partition you want to use. So we don't let the integration service to take care of our partitioning of the tables, right? So we don't use this one ever. Number of partitions determines the number of partitions that the integration service creates when you configure dynamic partition. We don't use this. You can ignore this one. Are you confused? Because this presentation has a shitload of properties. What else should I remember? What actually should be known for interview? Should I know for interview? Should all really be used in real-time projects? Haha, no, no, no. That's why I have separated. If you see the presentation, I have separated in orange color. Orange colors are very important. Maybe 8, 9 properties. Not all the properties are important here. So that's why let us recap the important orange stuff. Okay. So let us stop this all bullshit and only talk about the important properties which are needed for real-time work and projects. Okay. Let's start from the beginning. So general options we have in the properties tab. We only bother about write backward compatible session log, which is very important for us to review the data. I mean, in the log information in a log text editor outside, because history files we may be revisiting them. So the monitor may not be showing your history files, so you have to see in the editor only. Okay. So write backward compatible session log file are very important, and it's by best practice to check it on. Source connection value. Source connection value, target connection values are very important. These are mostly connection parameters for sources and targets if they are database. Treat source rows as, by default it will be insert. If your mapping has multiple update strategies which can declare delete, update, insert at a time in the mapping, then it will be data driven. Otherwise you can select whatever you want to select. Say for example, if you want to update, then update it. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, no? Say for example, this treat source rows as delete, but Informatica mapping has no update strategy, then by default mapping is inserting the records. If you keep the delete here, it will fail, because by default it will be insert, then it will say that deletion is not possible on the target table. So for deletion updation, you need update strategy so that you have the target a particular key based delete. Okay, insert it can happen without any keys. That way insert is default. And if you have update strategy, then data driven is default. If data driven is not there, but you have multiple update strategies in the mapping, then treat source rows as maybe an insert or delete or update, then nothing will happen. It will fail. It must be data driven. So these four are very important for the general options. Let us say the next one. Properties tab, performance options. So there are couple of options here which are very important. Enable high precision, push down optimization. These two are important. Push down optimization, in my 15 years of experience, I never use it because as I told you, errors and log information you have to see it in the database, because we are pushing the logic either in source or target. So we have to check every time in the session logs. I mean in the database logs instead of our session logs. That's a problem. And the next one is we have push down optimization and enable high precision. Enable high precision is very important to make the bigger decimal values to be loaded as is instead of exponential values. That's why these two are very important. Others can be ignored. Let us see config object tab on the advanced tab. The constraint based load ordering is very important. As I told you, parent child relationship will be taken care of there. And custom properties are very important, especially when you have a target file and file header will be having the hash. So if you want to remove it, then remove output header hash is equal to S. Property has to be set or the customer property. There's nothing else here. Let us see config object last option log options. Log options, we really want save session log by timestamp session runs. Save session log file for these runs will be 5. We default will keep 5 session logs. Okay, that's the best practice. Let us see config object tab and error handling options here. Stop on errors are very important. By default we'll keep it by default it's 0, but we'll keep it 1 so that early failure will be easy for early detection of the errors and corrections. Okay, one error correction may be correcting the other ones too. Okay, and error log type, mostly it's none, we don't change it, but if project or client demands it, then we have to use the tables. Okay, that's it in error handling. That's it for this presentation, folks. I will prepare this part 2 presentation for this session properties, especially mapping components and other tabs. That will be a second presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good one.